Close your eyes for a second and just picture this. You are 8 years old. You're on the playground.
Oh, wow. Yeah, setting the scene.
Right. The sun is shining. You've got those little wood chips in your sneakers, and you are just perfectly, entirely content.
The best feeling.
It is. You are the absolute master of your domain, which at this exact moment happens to be the monkey bars. And then it happens.
Yep. I know exactly where this is going.
Someone, like maybe an older kid or maybe a friend you're really trying to impress, walks up and challenges you to do something incredibly, undeniably foolish.
And instantly everything changes.
Completely. The temperature just drops. The entire power dynamic shifts. Like, the eyes of every single one of your peers are instantly locked onto you, and they are just waiting.
It's terrifying.
That universal, terrifying childhood experience, right? That sudden, jarring shift from absolute safety to severe social peril, well, that is the foundation of today's exploration. Welcome to another deep dive.
Thanks for having me back. And you know, it is a really profound moment in human development, that playground freeze response you just described.
Yeah, the freeze. We all know it.
Because what we're really analyzing here isn't just some silly game. It is the precise cognitive threshold where a child suddenly realizes, oh, wait, I am a participant in a society.
Right.
And that this society has rules, it has these intense invisible pressures, and very, very harsh social penalties for non-compliance.
And today, we are actually pulling apart the machinery of how we teach kids to navigate that terrifying society.
Which is no small feat.
No, definitely not. So for you listening, whether you're, commuting, washing dishes, or pretending to work right now, our source material today is highly specific, and it's probably going to trigger a bit of nostalgia.
Oh, absolutely.
We are looking at a transcript excerpted from a video titled The Berenstain Bears and the Double Dare. It's written by the very prolific Stan and Jan Berenstain. Yeah, total classics. And specifically, we are analyzing a version sourced from a YouTube channel called Bedtime Anytime Stories.
Which is a really interesting twist because adapting classic print literature into a digital audio-focused format for a modern young audience, well, it adds a fascinating layer to all this.
How so?
Well, we aren't just looking at text anymore, right? We are looking at an auditory experience that is engineered for retention.
Got it. Which actually brings us to our core mission today. We are taking this transcript and completely deconstructing it to understand the underlying mechanics of a concept that is just endlessly fascinating.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Or Jin Ge Er Tong. For those unfamiliar, it translates roughly to telling to children or storytelling for children.
But we should clarify framing it as just, using smaller words is doing it a massive disservice.
Oh, yeah. It's way more than that. It is an entire architectural discipline. Like, it's the complex art of communicating terrifying, abstract social dynamics like peer pressure, personal boundaries, consequences to a young brain. A brain that literally has not yet developed the prefrontal cortex required to process abstract risk.
Wait, literally? They just don't have the hardware yet.
Exactly. That lack of a fully developed prefrontal cortex is the crux of the whole challenge. You are trying to translate high-stakes adult social anxieties into a sensory language that a 5, 6, or 7-year-old can not only comprehend, but actually internalize and apply.
Right, because you can't just hand a 6-year-old a textbook on social dynamics.
No, you'd lose them instantly.
Yeah.
It requires a completely different set of narrative tools than adult fiction. You really have to bypass complex logic and aim directly for experiential empathy.
So if you are a parent trying to guide your kids through the literal and figurative playgrounds of life, or an educator, or honestly just someone fascinated by the psychology of how humans share knowledge, you are going to see how this works.
It's quite brilliant.
It is. You'll see how the seemingly simple cartoon bear story deploys highly specific auditory and narrative triggers to teach a massive behavioral lesson, and it does it without ever sounding like a boring lecture.
Right. And to understand how they pull off that psychological trick, we really have to look closely at how the story begins.
Okay, let's look at the beginning.
Because a novice storyteller might just jump straight into the conflict, right? Straight to the dare, get to the action. But the Berenstains don't do that at all.
Far from it. I mean, looking at the transcript, before we get anywhere near the trauma of this double dare, the authors spend a lot of narrative real estate establishing what we can call the baseline of normalcy.
The baseline is crucial.
Yeah, the text begins with these scattered, almost impossibly mundane mentions of everyday activities. It specifically highlights shopping And jump rope.
Very mundane.
Right. It establishes the core family unit immediately, too. Brother, sister, mama, and papa. Everyone is exactly in their correct place, doing predictable, safe things.
What's fascinating here is the psychological necessity of that mundane opening. It cannot be overstated.
Why is it so necessary, though? Like, why dedicate precious narrative time to jumping rope and running errands?
Because of how a child's brain relies on schema.
Schema. Like a framework.
Essentially, yes. A schema is a mental blueprint of how the world is supposed to work. When we talk about the principles of Yui, a fundamental, unbreakable rule is that you cannot effectively teach a child about the disruption of bad choices if you haven't clearly, painstakingly established what normal, safe behavior looks like first.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
to build the house before you can show the child why playing with matches inside it is a terrible idea.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. I've heard people compare this specific storytelling tactic to how a horror movie always starts on a sunny day in a quiet suburb.
That's an interesting comparison.
You know the trope, right? The sprinklers are going on the manicured lawns, the golden retriever is catching a frisbee, the neighbors are waving.
The perfect picturesque neighborhood.
Exactly. The director is essentially showing you this perfect piece just so the eventual disruption feels infinitely worse. But is that really an accurate comparison for children's literature? Because a kid isn't watching a slasher film here.
Well, functionally, it is the exact same narrative pacing device.
Hmm.
But the scale of the horror is calibrated for a child's specific developmental stage.
Okay, calibrated how?
For an adult watching a thriller, the disruption of the sunny suburb is a literal monster, or a natural disaster, or a home invasion. For a child, the horror isn't a physical monster hiding in the woods.
Right.
The horror is the sudden, jarring introduction of social anxiety into a predictable space. The safe space is playing jump rope with Sister. Sister represents the ultimate domestic known.
Because the game is so simple.
Yes. The rules of jump rope are mathematically predictable. You jump, the rope goes under, you jump again. Establishing this rhythmic predictability means that when the social chaos eventually arrives, the child listener feels the contrast viscerally.
They feel the drop.
Exactly. They recognize that the fundamental laws of their universe have just been suspended, even if they completely lack the vocabulary to articulate it.
Let's actually talk about Sister for a second, because looking closely at how she's positioned in this early transcript, she isn't driving the action.
No, not at all.
Brother is the one who is going to face the conflict. Sister is just kind of there. She's jumping rope. She's observing. So is she just background scenery to establish that baseline you mentioned?
She is far more active than background scenery. In the framework of how children consume media, Sister is playing a highly sophisticated, multi-layered role. She is the proxy for the audience.
The proxy.
Yeah, she is the literal stand-in for the listener or, the child sitting on the living room floor watching this YouTube video.
But wait, if she's the proxy, why isn't she the one making the mistake? I mean, wouldn't a child relate more to the protagonist making the error?
You'd think so, but that is where the concept of the affective filter comes into play.
Hold on, I need to stop you there. What exactly is an affective filter? Break that down for me, because that sounds like something attached to my furnace.
That's fair. The affective filter is a concept originally from linguistics and education, specifically Stephen Krashen's theories on language acquisition. But it applies beautifully to narrative reception, too.
Okay, so what is it in this context?
Think of it as an invisible psychological wall in a learner's brain. When a child feels anxious, defensive, or judged, this wall goes up. The affective filter is high, and absolutely no new information can get through.
Oh, wow. So if they feel attacked, they just shut down.
Exactly. If a story points a direct finger at the young reader and aggressively says, "You must not give in to peer pressure," or "You are a bad kid," the child's affective filter skyrockets. Their defenses go up. They stop internalizing the lesson because they feel attacked.
So by placing Sister in the scene as just an observer to brother's impending mistakes, the authors bypass that wall entirely.
Precisely. The young listener gets to safely watch the disaster unfold from a slight, comfortable remove. Sister isn't the one making the bad choice, right?
Right.
So the child listener doesn't have to feel the immediate defensive guilt of being naughty. They get to learn the lesson vicariously through brother's stress. It drastically lowers the affective filter. It makes the child highly receptive to the moral of the story because they feel safely insulated.
I see the mechanics of that, I really do. But I have to challenge the idea of sister being purely a safe proxy.
Okay, go ahead.
Think about your own siblings or kids you know. Isn't sister also representing the benchmark of the good kid?
Mhm.
Like her presence jumping rope isn't just neutral observation, it creates its own kind of subtle pressure. Brother is about to really mess up, and sister is standing right there, perfectly adhering to the baseline of normalcy. It kind of amplifies his failure, doesn't it? Because the contrast is standing 2 feet away holding a jump rope.
That is an excellent distinction. Yeah, she provides simultaneous safety for the reader and amplified pressure for the protagonist.
It's a dual role.
It is.
Yeah.
She is the physical manifestation of the domestic rules he is about to break. And that contrast is violently shattered when we transition from the safe domestic sphere into the wildly unpredictable social sphere.
Which happens basically the second a very specific character introduces a binding challenge.
Yes, enter the antagonist.
Too tall. And the immediate escalation of the conflict via the titular double dare.
Let's dissect the name first.
Yeah, too tall. It's so aggressively blunt. Why is physical size the go-to mechanism for communicating power imbalances in this concept of do? Like, why not make him too smart or too rich or too popular?
Well, because abstract concepts like popularity or wealth require a nuanced understanding of social capital.
Well,
A 6-year-old simply hasn't developed that yet.
that makes sense. They don't know what a stock portfolio is.
Exactly. Physical size is the most primal, evolutionary way a human being understands power dynamics. To a young developing brain, bigger inherently equals more authority, more capability, and significantly more danger.
So the intimidation is literally baked into his DNA.
Yes, by naming the antagonist too tall, the authors completely bypass the need to waste time explaining the social hierarchy of the playground. It immediately communicates physical dominance to a young listener.
They just hear too tall and their brain does the math.
Right. Their brain automatically positions brother as smaller, weaker, and therefore at a massive disadvantage. It sets the stage perfectly for the mechanism Too Tall uses to assert that dominance.
The double dare.
The double dare.
Now, I want to spend some real time on this because a standard dare is one thing. A dare is a simple challenge, like, I dare you to touch that weird bug. You can say no, and the game just ends.
Right, the stakes are low.
But a double dare is practically a legally binding contract on the playground. It's a massive escalation.
It is an entirely different sociological phenomenon. It's really the weaponization of pride and social standing.
Think about the adult equivalent for a second, because I think you listening will recognize this exact feeling. Imagine you are in a high-stakes corporate boardroom. You're a mid-level manager.
Okay, painting the picture.
And a senior colleague, someone with much more influence, basically an adult version of Too Tall, turns to you in front of the entire executive team. They don't just ask you a polite question. They say, I think you should present your half-finished, untested financial projections right now. Unless, of course, you don't think you have the competence to handle it.
Ouch, yeah. The physiological panic triggered in that boardroom scenario is identical to what brother feels on the playground.
The flushed cheeks, the racing heart, the feeling of the walls literally closing in. It's the exact same response, whether you are 5 or 50.
It really is.
You know presenting that data is a terrible idea. You know you shouldn't do it. But the social cost of backing down in front of an audience of your peers feels drastically worse than the potential consequences of failing the task itself.
What you were describing is social entrapment, and it is the core engine of the double dare. A standard dare leaves room for passive refusal. You can shrug it off. But the double dare explicitly removes that option.
It traps you.
It does. The phrasing inherently implies that if you refuse, you aren't just declining a front activity, you are publicly accepting a lower rank in the social hierarchy. You are conceding absolute dominance to the person who issued the dare.
Wow.
Stan and Jan Berenstain isolated that specific, agonizing feeling of entrapment perfectly. Brother isn't considering the dare because he has any intrinsic desire to do the action. He is considering it solely because he is paralyzed by the social consequences of refusing Too Tall.
And Too Tall knows exactly what he's doing here. He doesn't just issue the double dare and stand back with his arms crossed waiting politely for an answer.
Oh, no.
He actively enforces the contract using a tactic that is visceral, uncomfortable, and resonates incredibly deeply with anyone who has ever been a kid.
The auditory weapon of the playground.
Yes. According to the transcript, Too Tall explicitly targets Brother with the word chicken. But because this is sourced from the Bedtime Anytime Stories video, the transcript reveals an added layer. It actually contains phonetic transcriptions of clucking sounds.
Sound effects.
Yeah, it literally spells out the buck, 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 or asaw sounds of a chicken being directed at Brother.
This is a phenomenal example of auditory storytelling, and that is a crucial, load-bearing pillar of GVO.
How so?
Consider the cognitive limitations we discussed earlier. If you were telling a story to young children,
Yeah.
relying on abstract emotional descriptors is a guaranteed way to lose your audience.
Right.
If the text read, "Brother felt a deep, overwhelming sense of cowardice and a profound loss of personal honor,"
The kid would be asleep.
exactly. The
That's
child's brain would completely disengage. They do not possess the framework to process loss of personal honor when they're literally still trying to master tying their shoes.
But animal mimicry, that somehow bypasses the logical brain completely. Why is that? Like, why do kids naturally, almost universally, gravitate toward using animal sounds to demean each other?
That's a great question.
I remember kids doing this in my own childhood, and it felt so uniquely devastating. It felt much worse than being called a standard insult.
To understand that, we actually have to dip into evolutionary psychology and the mechanics of public bullying. Using an animal sound is an act of dehumanization.
Wow, dehumanization, that's heavy.
It is, but that's what's happening. It strips the target of their human dignity and reduces them to something fundamentally less than human. In this case, a chicken something easily frightened, foolish, and destined to be prey.
That makes total sense.
When Too Tall calls Brother a chicken and begins clucking at him, it isn't just name-calling. It is a calculated act of public degradation. It hits the amygdala, the brain's fear center, long before the logical prefrontal cortex can intervene to say, wait, I am not actually a bird.
And the public nature of it is what makes it so lethal, right? It's a theatrical performance.
Yes, theater is the perfect word.
Calling someone a chicken, doing the whole buck-buck vocal routine, flapping your arms, it's never done in private. Too Tall isn't whispering this in Brother's ear. He is performing for the rest of the playground.
He's playing to the crowd.
Right. He is drawing the audience in, entertaining them, and simultaneously isolating his victim.
You hit on the vital component there, making the audience complicit. Laughter is contagious, even nervous laughter. When Too Tall performs the chicken taunt, the other children laugh, which instantly aligns them with Too Tall's dominance, and it isolates Brother.
So it's a double whammy.
It is, and the format of bedtime anytime stories likely leverages this heavily. In an audiovisual medium,
Yeah.
emphasizing these absurd, slightly funny sound effects keeps the child listener highly engaged.
Because it sounds silly.
Right. Their auditory attention is captured by the silly bok bok, but that sound delivers the sharp, deeply uncomfortable, moral sting of peer pressure right along with it.
If you're listening to this right now, think about a time you were publicly mocked, even mildly. Your logical brain knows it shouldn't matter, but your body reacts.
You feel it physically.
You feel the anxiety in your stomach. The story uses that silly sound to force the listener to feel the physiological anxiety of being mocked. You hear the clucking and you physically feel how awful it is for Brother. It forces empathy through shared discomfort.
And this intense auditory and social pressure is the catalyst. It is what propels Brother into motion. He cannot endure the sound of the clucking. He cannot survive the public shame. So his brain calculates that accepting the double dare is the lesser of two evils.
Which brings us to the actual execution phase, because he has to do something to fulfill the contract.
A dare is fundamentally an action, yeah.
Right, you can't just be double dared to stand still and exist. You need an objective. And this is where we transition to the actual target of the dare, which honestly reveals so much about how these authors design stakes specifically calibrated for a young audience.
It's very intentional.
The transcript reveals that the object of this intense, socially binding contract is a watermelon, specifically a watermelon located in Farmer Ben's patch.
Okay, if we connect this to the bigger picture, let's apply our structural analysis here. Why a watermelon?
Yeah, why?
If the goal of the story is to teach a lesson about the dangers of stealing under peer pressure, why didn't Stan and Jan Berenstain have the dare be about stealing a single apple? Or a piece of candy from a corner store? Or sneaking a small plastic toy from a friend's bedroom?
I was asking myself the exact same thing when I was the source material.
Yeah.
Why choose the heaviest, most awkwardly shaped, cumbersome fruit in the entire produce section?
Think about the logistical realities of theft from a child's perspective. A child can subtly slip a piece of candy into their pocket. They can hide a small action figure in their jacket sleeves.
Sure.
If the dare was to steal something small and manageable, there is a very real narrative possibility that Brother could succeed. He could steal the candy, show it to Too Tall, gain the social approval, and get away with it.
Which would completely ruin the pedagogy of the story. If he gets away with it, the lesson the kid learns is, hey, peer pressure works and stealing pays off as long as you're sneaky.
Exactly. A successful theft muddies the moral lesson beyond repair. So the authors have to engineer a scenario where failure is absolute and guaranteed. Watermelons are massive, they're dense, and most importantly, they're completely impossible to conceal on your person.
It's like daring a bank robber to steal a solid iron anvil on foot. You literally cannot get away with it.
That is a brilliant analogy.
You can't put a 15-pound watermelon in your pocket. You can't act casual and whistle while carrying a watermelon down the street. The physical comedy of a small bear trying to lug this giant green orb is great for the visuals, but more importantly, it elevates the logistical impossibility of the act. The story is rigged.
Rigged is the perfect word. The authors constructed a physical puzzle with absolutely no solution. The child reader might not consciously process the logistics, but subconsciously, their developing brain recognizes that brother is doomed the second the word watermelon is introduced.
They know it's a trap.
Yes, the sheer physical attributes of the object guarantee that the protagonist must get caught and therefore must be forced to learn the lesson.
But it's not just the physical object itself, right? The location is equally important. It's not a watermelon sitting unattended at a grocery store checkout line. It's growing in Farmer Ben's patch. Why introduce Farmer Ben?
Because of how a child's understanding of rules and laws expands as they age. In early childhood, and in the early baseline section of our story, the ultimate singular authorities are Mama and Papa.
Right.
The rules are entirely domestic. Don't hit your sister, eat your vegetables, go to bed on time. But by introducing Farmer Ben, the authors are deliberately expanding the child's moral universe. Farmer Ben represents a community authority figure outside of the immediate family unit.
That makes total sense because, like, if you take a cookie from your own kitchen without asking, Mom gets mad. That's a domestic rule violation. But if you take a watermelon from Farmer Ben's farm, you are violating the social contract of the wider community.
Yes, exactly.
It's the difference between breaking a house rule and breaking the law.
Right. And Tio often involves these subtle escalations of civic duty. It teaches children that their actions do not exist in a vacuum. Their choices have consequences that ripple outward into the world. You aren't just accountable to your parents, you are accountable to your neighbors, to the people who grow your food, to society at large.
Wow.
Stealing from Farmer Ben introduces the concept of external victims and external justice.
So let's look at where Brother is currently standing in the narrative. He is caught in this impossible, terrifying matrix. He's carrying the metaphorical and literal anvil. He is trying to survive the horror of the double dare, the searing public humiliation of the chicken taunts, and the physical impossibility of stealing Farmer Ben's giant watermelon.
It's a lot.
The cognitive load and the anxiety for a young reader at this climax must be absolutely peaking.
It is at the absolute breaking point, and this is a critical rule of psychological pacing in children's media. You cannot leave a child suspended in a state of severe unresolved anxiety.
No, that sounds awful.
If the story ended with Brother running through the woods, terrified, clutching a stolen watermelon while Farmer Ben chased him, well, it would just be a trauma simulator. The narrative must resolve in a way that provides a clear, understandable moral compass. The anxiety must be diffused.
Which brings us to the crucial necessity of the safety net. Because after all this escalating chaos, the transcript shows the recurring presence and the eventual necessary intervention of the ultimate authorities, Mama and Papa.
Their intervention isn't just a convenient plot resolution. It is a structural mandate in the genre of children's moral literature. We analyzed how the story began with them, carefully establishing that baseline of predictability and safety. Now, the narrative arc requires them to return to restore that safety after the social disruption of the playground.
But I want to push back on how they function here. Are they just acting as the police?
How do you mean?
Like, do they just show up, catch him with the watermelon, punish him, and the story ends? Because if so, the lesson is just don't get caught by the cops.
No, and that distinction is what separates mediocre children's media from exceptional TO. Their role is fundamentally restorative, not punitive. Let's map out the symbolic architecture we've seen so far.
Okay, map it out.
Too tall represents the chaotic, unmanageable pressure of the outside world. Farmer Ben represents external community law and civic consequences. But Mama and Papa represent the ultimate psychological safety net. They are the moral arbiters.
So what does this all mean? Instead of just punishing him, they act as a processing center for his guilt.
Precisely. In sophisticated storytelling for children, you have to allow the protagonist to fully fail. The child reader needs to see Brother yield to the double dare. They need to watch him attempt the physically impossible heist, because his fear of the bok-bok chicken taunts temporarily overrode his moral compass.
Then you just see the crash.
Yes. But crucially, he must ultimately face his parents not just to be punished, but to unpack the mechanics of his failure.
It's the debriefing phase. I love this. When you are a kid, your brain literally does not have the RAM, the cognitive capacity to process the incredibly complex web of peer pressure, public humiliation, theft, fear of community reprisal, and domestic guilt all at the same exact time. It's just way too much data.
The cognitive load is overwhelming. They need an external processor. They need a trusted, secure attachment figure to sit down and say, let's deconstruct what just happened. Why did you agree to take the watermelon? How did Tutol's words make you feel in your body? What are the actual consequences of this action? And what is the protocol for the next time someone challenges you?
This makes me realize something profound about the entire architecture of this transcript. For everyone listening, think about this. The story isn't actually about stealing a watermelon at all.
Well,
The watermelon is just a prop.
expand on that. The theft is secondary.
Completely secondary. The theft is just the physical vehicle required to manifest the emotional burden. The actual substance of the story, the reason it functions so perfectly as a bedtime anytime story, the reason it resonates, is that it is an emotional instruction manual.
An instruction manual for navigating society.
Right. It teaches kids how to survive the feeling of being completely, utterly overwhelmed by the social demands of their peers. It's demonstrating that no matter how physically intimidating Too Tall is, and no matter how piercing and awful those bok bok chicken taunts get, trying to carry the literal and metaphorical weight of that giant guilt watermelon by yourself is significantly worse.
It is a brilliant illustration of cognitive dissonance. The pain of the secret outweighs the pain of the confession.
Exactly. It shows the child that coming clean to mama and papa, admitting that you totally messed up and caved to the pressure, is actually a release valve. It is less painful to face the restorative justice of your parents than it is to try and survive the hostile, predatory jungle of the playground entirely on your own.
It validates the child's lived experience. It doesn't pretend peer pressure isn't scary. It admits that, yes, the playground is terrifying and bullies are powerful, but it offers a reliable, structured escape hatch.
The escape hatch of home.
Right. It tells the listener, when the outside world gets too loud, when the social contracts force you into an impossible corner, home is the designated zone where you go to fix the broken pieces.
It's honestly incredible how much heavy, complex psychological architecture is hidden inside a vintage cartoon bear family. Let's take a breath and briefly synthesize the journey we've been on today because we've covered a massive amount of narrative ground.
We really have.
We started with the sheer innocence of jumping rope and running errands, establishing that vital psychological baseline of normalcy, and leveraging the effective filter through Sister.
We then watched that safety violently shattered by the introduction of physical dominance in the form of Too Tall and the complex, socially binding contract of the double dare.
We analyzed the visceral auditory warfare of the chicken taunt, how the bok bok bypasses logic, strips away dignity through dehumanization, and uses the audience to force compliance. We laughed at the absurd, logistically impossible stakes of Farmer Ben's watermelons, a brilliant mechanism engineered to guarantee failure and introduce the concept of community law.
And finally, we track the narrative back to the grounding, restorative presence of Mama and Papa, who act not as punitive police, but as the external cognitive processors necessary to debrief the trauma of peer pressure. Stan and Jan Berenstain genuinely created a masterclass in Tannel.
They really did.
They took abstract, paralyzing sociological concepts and translated them into tangible, physical, and auditory elements that a young mind can grasp, process, and apply.
They respected the intelligence of children by giving them a very real, very scary dilemma, but they provided the exact psychological scaffolding needed to survive it. It really makes you look at every simple bedtime story through an entirely different lens.
It changes everything.
But before we completely wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over. Throughout this entire exploration, we've focused heavily on Too Tall's pressure on Brother. We've looked at the dynamic between the bully and the target. But I want you to think back to the very beginning of the scene. Think about Sister jumping rope. Think about the other kids standing around.
Observers.
A double dare is a social contract, and a contract only has power if there is an audience to witness and enforce it. The humiliation requires witnesses. If Sister hadn't been there, if the playground had been completely entirely empty, would the bok bok chicken pond have worked? Would Brother have felt that suffocating life or death pressure to steal an impossibly heavy watermelon if there was absolutely no one around to watch him fail?
That's a great question.
So, the next time you see a child, or let's be honest, the next time you see an adult in a boardroom or arguing in a comment section on social media, yielding to immense, irrational peer pressure, look past the person making the dare. Look at the perimeter. Ask yourself, are they really afraid of the dare itself, or are they simply terrified of the audience? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration encourages you to look much, much closer at the underlying architecture of the simple stories you share with the children in your life. There is always a massive world operating just beneath the surface. Until next time.